Hello, thanks for joining us for Special Report Online. I'm Brett Baer. If this is your first time aboard, welcome. It's a different forum. Continue the conversation with our panel. We want to hear from you, so weigh in, ask some questions, type them in. If you don't see them right away, don't worry. We'll put them in as fast as we can. Our panel's sticking around. Steve, Charlie, AB, and Charles, continuing our discussion where we left off. I mean, it seems like Colin Powell's pretty consistent in his emails. I mean, he was, as you mentioned, an equal opportunity criticizer.
And he's your classic Rockefeller, middle of the road, moderate Republican. I mean, it's a species that's largely extinct, which makes him so interesting, serving in many Republican administrations, high positions. Yet, as we noted, I think in the break, he voted twice for Obama, in 08 and in 12. He will undoubtedly vote for Hillary with the same kind of distaste and nose-holding that many conservatives, Republicans, moderates will. So I'm not very surprised. I mean, and he's a discreet guy. You don't hear that stuff announced publicly, but I think we got a pretty unvarnished view of what he really thinks.
He wasn't very diplomatic.
Yeah,
He wasn't. I'll be here all week.
Okay, thanks.
He did a good job of talking about the problem with the way she's conflating the idea of having a personal email with the idea of mishandling classified information on the computer.
What I found really interesting is that some cable channels, other cable channels, spent the day about Trump as a national disgrace and the birther movement was racist and the Trump comments, which I don't think was too shocking to where Colin Powell was since he supported President Obama. I thought what was more shocking was the email comments and the comments about, what his thoughts are about Hillary Clinton and her campaign and. Right?
No, I mean, I completely agree. And you drove it home with the clip that we played during the show where Hillary Clinton is hiding behind Colin Powell on the email stuff. And then declares, practically screams at you at that event in Detroit, release it. I want it all out. He's right. I want it all out. And of course, she didn't release it all. They went to great lengths not to release it all, using BleachBit and other of these tools. I thought that was clearly the news coming out of these emails today. And I mean, just as not to sound like a journalistic scold, it does give me some discomfort talking about the Powell emails. I mean, his spokesman affirmed that they were his, or confirmed that they were his, but. Man,
I agree.
It's hard.
Let's just talk about that for a second.
It's hard.
Now, let's just say that this is Russia. And let's just say that that's confirmed. And we should point out that intelligence officials have never gone that far, that it's 100% Russia. But privately, they say it is somehow connected to Russia. The fact that Russia is influencing day to day what we're covering in this election, 50-plus days from the election, I think is a bigger story than we're not talking about it enough.
Oh, I agree, and I think that the threat that they could have on November 8th, actually messing with some numbers here and there, at least raising the doubts that they've already raised about what will happen to states that don't have paper trails, is really frightening. And the truth is, it was so interesting to hear that Mike Pence was up against some pushback from Republicans in the Congress when he met with them privately yesterday about this very issue, about Trump going on Russian, Kremlin-sponsored TV. It really is. Donald Trump doesn't want to be president of a country where Russian hackers can control this much of what's going on in our debate. So I think it should be a nonpartisan reaction here of horror that no matter who you are, we're all Americans, and this is truly frightening.
Well, Pence tried to walk the line, saying that what Trump has been saying, he kind of was cleaning up on aisle 4, that he's saying that Trump was saying that he's a good leader and a strong leader in comparison to President Obama here. But it still is iffy. The mere fact that Russia is reaching out and playing a part in this election is shocking.
And Pence has done a very good job, surprisingly good job of doing that, playing that cleanup on aisle 4. for the campaign. But the problem with it, and AB is exactly right, of course, and it's horrifying, especially if it is an outside, whatever it is, it's espionage of some sort, and that's not a good thing, and that's bad for America. But the problem is, what do you do about it? You can't unsee the emails,
right.
and you can't do anything
can't
about
they don't exist.
Yeah, and so what do you do about them? And you're right, Brett. It probably ought to be a bigger story. We ought to be talking about it more. But I don't see anything to do.
Yeah, well, Jake the Goose agrees with you. Brett, why is the source Russia news? It is the content that is the news. Russia is doing what the media used to do and report. Well, actually, Jake, Russia is doing more. They're hacking, getting stuff, releasing it. By the way, the DNC, another huge 7 megabytes of emails is now out in the world that is being digested, and we have people looking through stuff. Donna Brazil, the DNC chair, said don't look through it because there's malware in there and you might get it in your computer. We're taking that risk and we're going through them. The RNC, there was a report that they were hacked tonight. Sean Spicer said tonight on Twitter that that is not true as of yet, but we're following that as well.
Look, I think part of this lies at the feet of Barack Obama. This is major, devastating, state-sponsored espionage. It's high-tech, so you don't see it, but it's as if the Russians had spies and agents, as they did when they stole atomic secrets, and they had the drop-offs in the parks and in the pumpkins and everywhere. And, that was a huge story. People were hanged for that, electrocuted for that. This is not minor stuff. And to use it to disrupt our political system, look, Putin sees all political events and all elections as fraudulent. He thinks that his election, the one that he attacked Hillary for disrupting, for supposedly supporting the opposition and the demonstrations, he has contempt for elections, and he thinks the only purpose of them is to build your own support, to pretend to show popular support, and to manipulate them. And he thinks, I'm sure he does, as sophisticated as he is, that that's done everywhere, and he's going to join it. But the fact is, to do it against, and he does it in Ukraine, they have done it, the Russians, for 50 years, in Italian elections, French elections, everywhere. But to do it against the United States, you can only do it if you have utter contempt for the spine of the other side.
Exactly.
Because the answer to espionage is counter-espionage.
Yeah.
And, Obama acts as if, well, maybe. He seems totally unperturbed by this. It should be a major issue. It should be the Riot Act read to the Russians. And we should be stealing their secrets and releasing them strategically as well.
To be fair, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes in the red team, blue team stuff on the NSA. But at what point is cyber attack, cyber espionage, an act of war? At what point does it cross the line and become you are interfering in the sovereign nation of the United States?
That's what's so challenging to the federal government, because there has to be a federal response. Charles is right. There should be a nation-to-nation response. But when you talk about the kind of loose new world of hackers from everywhere, some of whom could be tied to Russian criminal networks, some could be tied to the Russian government, some tied to the Iranians. I mean, the problem is that it really comes down to everyone needing to fight it in their own offices and in their own state governments. Everywhere, all the time, because the federal government can't protect us. So while you can imagine a punitive response and a retaliatory response, the actual prevention part at this point is overwhelming and seems impossible.
But it's very important. I think Charles is exactly right. It's very important that the United States not just handle this behind the scenes with whatever NSA or the Pentagon teams are doing. We need to raise this publicly. I mean, this should be a major issue, perhaps the major issue that the president is talking about with respect to Russia, particularly if we have evidence that Russia is trying to influence the outcome of our elections.
And there are people writing in, are we sure that it's Russia? Now listen, publicly, Clapper has said it's not 100%. He's been asked it numerous times on the record, but privately, you talk to U.S. intel people,
right.
They will tell you that is what is happening.
Well, here's what they'll say. I mean, having spoken to some intel people about this, and I know you have too, Brett, so correct me if you've got better information, they can say we can show for sure that the Russians have been in there. We can see that the Russians have been in there. What we can't do is establish that the Russians have provided this information to either WikiLeaks or DC Leaks with certitude. Now, there are all sorts of circumstantial things that point to relationships between Russian intelligence and these other things. But if you want to be extra careful about it, I think that's the way to characterize it. So let me make one final point real quick. Not only is the Obama administration not raising this publicly and going after Russia, confronting Russia about this, which I think is a huge failure. But this New York Times story on the front page today about Russia, about the United States now working with Russia in what the New York Times called an extraordinary collaboration, where the U.S. intelligence community and the Pentagon is going to be providing intelligence to the Russians that the Pentagon fears can be basically reverse engineered so that the Russians can see how we conduct our intelligence. So we're not only not confronting them on this, we're giving them basically a window into how we operate on this over the objections of the military and intelligence community, including Secretary of Defense Ash Carter. Extraordinary developments.
You were going to say?
Look, exactly. I mean, over the 7 years, when all this is happening, Obama never raises it, at least in public. You don't see any evidence of our leaking stuff of theirs. We act as if this is something completely new. This is old-fashioned state espionage, but done in a different way. And we never had 100% certainty. There were always cutouts, people, murky East German agents who would flit across the border and who would carry secrets. There was never certainty. But at the same time, we do the reset with them. We give them a START treaty, completely unnecessary, which is helpful to them. We give them legitimacy. We've now handed over Syria to them, as Steve says. What all this is about, apart from the scandal of sharing intelligence information and methods, essentially, with the Russians in Syria, which we've never done with non-allies, is the fact that we've essentially handed over Syria, given up on the idea of opposing the regime, and we're going to be at the same side as the Russians. Our airplanes are going to be bombing the same targets when we know that Russia's interest and objective is to preserve the butcher in Damascus. This is all happening at the same time. It's a disconnect, and the president appears totally unperturbed.
Marilyn Geezer writes in, if you're so horrified by the email hacking and that it may influence the U.S. election, why do you report the details of these emails? Well, we say once it's out there, we're going to report it, but we're also going to report on how it got out there. And, more importantly, to AB's point, U.S. intelligence officials and federal authorities have said they're concerned about the election, being more active hacking into the election process. They're pretty convinced, though, AB, that there's not going to be votes that can be adjusted by hacking. They don't think that that's going to happen.
Well, we've discussed this before. The FBI sent out its alert, which we figured might have been sort of a signal to Russia, but at the same time, the Homeland Security Secretary
said... By the
way,
that's not Russia. That's the control room raising the blind here.
Said that they wanted to possibly bring our election machines under critical infrastructure, which sounds really fancy, but I don't know how it would be helpful. But they held a conference call throughout the country with different states, and their relevant department heads, and said, run tests and do what you can to try to protect your system, because they're convinced that so much doubt has already been sown and this is such a polarizing election anyway, that we can imagine the calls for recounts and the panics the next day. Any state without a paper trail is going to come under serious fire. And they say those Diebold machines, I can't remember right now which states have them, but are vulnerable to hacking. So it's just that the doubt has been sown, and that we're going to have Democrats, if Trump wins, saying that Putin threw it to Trump, and Trump has never come out and said this is horrible and they shouldn't be hacking into our system and I don't stand for this or anything. And then, of course, if Trump loses, he's going to say that the whole thing was rigged and
well, I think that whole argument, personally, of that it's rigged, is not good for the American system. To make that argument, if you're saying that it's not going to be legitimate. You can say that Washington is rigged for the elite, but if the election is rigged and we don't trust when we get to the election, I don't think that that's good for America overall.
And I also think that from the Trump camp, what we've heard in the last couple of weeks anyway, has been a more positive sort of message from there, which is probably part of why his numbers are going up.
All right, well, let's talk about the numbers.
Yeah.
What do you see in these numbers? Some of it is a major swing.
Yeah, and I think it's because, and we've sort of mentioned it, he's not saying things that are off message and stupid and things that draw terrible attention to him. But one of the things from the beginning that this trip to Flint, the idea that he's going to win Michigan, it's possible, but that's going to be a stretch for him, but it is possible. But the point is that he's doing these trips like this, like going to Mexico City, where he appears presidential. And what's so great about going to a place like Flint is that it's a place Republicans aren't supposed to go. And he's talking about things Republicans aren't supposed to talk about, because that's, the map has been set up this way, and it's a losing map, by the way, and increasingly losing map for Republicans. And one of the things that I think people like about him is that he's willing to try to break the mold and do something completely different. And whether he wins that or not, people appreciate the fact that he's trying to do that.
I will say that in recent weeks, I've talked to a number of people who were not on the Trump train at all. They weren't even close. They were, in fact, against. And they've listened to him lay out, pull the regulations, executive orders to get rid of regulations, corporate taxes, get them down, do that in the first 100 days. Protect religious freedom, the Supreme Court nominees versus Hillary Clinton, and stacking the deck about her policies versus his policies. And they say, for them, I've noticed this change. And I think that's happening, don't you? If you see the Republican numbers going up?
Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. It's very smart of them. They're trying to do two things at once. They're trying to increase the percentage of Republicans who will vote for Donald Trump, and they're trying to get everybody else, Democrats, moderates, independents, to look at Donald Trump and say, this guy could be president. That's basically their job between now and Election Day. And I think they've done a good job with the former thus far, with some hiccups. It's not the case that he hasn't said anything crazy over the past couple weeks. I would say the embrace of Putin, problematic. Creating a new entitlement should be a problem for many,
but does that
many
sell?
Conservatives.
I just think it's late in the game for him to try to convince women that he's. I don't know if you can do things at week 8, a policy, pronouncement like that's really going to swing a bunch of numbers. I do think for Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, a lot of the feelings about them is really baked into the cake. People saw a real Donald Trump for how many months? More than a year, and the reined-in Donald Trump is better. It makes Republican senators happy. He doesn't say mean things on Twitter. He calms down. He reads from the teleprompter. He follows his notes. When he doesn't, like at the Commander-in-Chief Forum and the night before when he was at something with General Flynn moderating him, he sounded completely nonsensical. The next night he went on to insult generals, buddy up to Putin, and blow himself up in the face. So it's a great campaign team that's doing the right thing for his campaign and his candidacy. But if you say, are women all of a sudden going to fall for that child care thing if they believe that he's a man who doesn't have the temperament or character, I don't know if the child care thing's really going to swing it.
Not that policy prescription, but the effort, to Charlie's point, that he's doing that and understands the plight of women. And he's going to the African-American communities, not because he's going to shave off a ton of African-American votes, but for moderates and independents who say, you know what, all this racist stuff is kind of crazy.
I think he gets credit for doing those things, and I think he's bringing Republicans home, and you see those numbers consolidating, and that helps his support. I'm saying, is he going to bring in women that, I mean, he's maybe bringing in some women that had voted for Romney, Republican women, college-educated women with whom he's doing so badly. He's going to try to get them back. Maybe the child care plan does that. I just don't know that that alone is going to turn the race. What's going to turn this race is people, their disgust with Hillary Clinton just growing and growing, and the ability of Donald Trump to depress her vote is pretty powerful. I think he has a really stubborn ceiling, and I don't think he is going to grow his vote that much. I think they both have ceilings. It's easier to depress her vote. His voters are really enthusiastic. Yeah. I don't know that he's like transforming his Big Ten right now. I really don't see that.
Jenny in the
numbers.
Heartland says, wow, such put-down comments about Trump. My friends like the child care thing. Now, Silver Goat says, I'm conflicted. I love watching SR Online, but now I have to miss Brit Hume. Well, you can record it. There's DVR. To AB's point, Charles, and we're going to wrap up early here, the debate. It is not a teleprompter event. It is a free-flowing discussion of policy. This will be the moment, right? September 26th.
I would say to be as hyperbolic as Trump's a physician in saying he was the healthiest guy in the history of the world. This could be the single most important presidential debate, first presidential debate for sure, in our history. And the reason is, and we see it in the numbers getting closer, you've got these two dynamics. You've got Hillary, who really doesn't have a campaign. Who knows what she's running on?
She's running on, she's not Trump.
Yeah, what I'm saying is she doesn't have sort of an agenda, anything that's attractive about her. She's a weak candidate. We've talked about this endlessly. So her strategy has been, it's a logical strategy, you want to paint Trump as a guy who is unfit, does not meet the threshold. The problem is, as her numbers are slipping, she gets more and more strident. I know it's a word you're not supposed to use, but sort of energized about that.
It's online.
And then ends up in the basket of deplorables. That's where she ends up. She's ratcheting it up. At the same time, and the reason that Trump is gaining, he's going kinder and gentler day by day. I mean, it isn't as if he's going to attract African Americans. It isn't as if he's going to change things among Hispanics because he shows up in Mexico. And it isn't as if the health care proposal of yesterday is going to win the suburban women of Philadelphia. It's that they're showing him as a guy with empathy and some stature. And the real problem he had with the Gold Star, the family, is that it showed a total lack of empathy. The same with the tweet he issued after the Orlando massacre. If he can change that image, it's not about the policy. It's that it's a guy who, yeah, in the end he cares. And that, I think, propels him over the threshold. If he can show that in the debate, he'll win the debate. He'll probably win the presidency.
It's going to be something to watch. A lot to cover. We've got it all here. Thanks for joining us on Special Report Online. I got to leave a little early tonight. Control room, a little goodbye. We'll see you next week.